We called it an expedition, as if the word could make the unknown polite. The Admiralty called it a line on a map. The merchants called it a wager. The officers called it destiny, because destiny sounds cleaner than hunger. To me, it was a duty dressed in canvas and tar, a floating chapel of splintered oak, packed with men who laughed too loudly and drank too fast, so they would not have to listen to the silence that waited beyond the last known currents. Our vessel was the Farwind, broad-beamed and stubborn. She carried 3 smaller boats lashed to her flanks like nervous children. Her hold was packed with salted meat, hard biscuit, lamp oil, rope, spare spars, and enough iron nails to rebuild a pier in the wild. She also carried a crate of holy texts sealed in wax, and a brass spoon, reliquary that was meant to ward off pagan airs, whatever that meant to the naval chaplain who did not come with us. He stayed behind in warmth and prayer. I was the one assigned to the deck, where hands split and teeth cracked, where fever took the weak and pride took the foolish. We left from a gray harbor under a gray sky. The gulls screamed as if offended by our courage. Mothers waved from stone quays, faces pinched with hope and shame. Men kissed their children and promised new lands and furs and glory, the way a drowning man promises air. I stood near the stern with my satchel of bandages and tinctures, feeling the ship's slow heave, watching the coastline shrink into a smear of slate. I tried to pray. The words came out thin. The first weeks were ordinary misery. Rope burn. Scurvy's first whispers. A cook's knife slipping into his thumb. A deckhand tumbling and cracking 2 ribs. I stitched, set, splinted, and cauterized. I listened to confessions in the cramped darkness between barrels. Some spoke of lovers they left behind. Some spoke of crimes they hoped the ocean would wash away. One man confessed he had never believed in anything at all, and he sounded relieved, as if unbelief were a blanket. At night, the Farwind creaked like an old man turning in bed. The wind played with the rigging and made it sing, high and thin, a music that could have been beautiful if it did not always sound like something calling from far away. The sea, for all its rage, was honest. It wanted to drown you and made no poetry about it. You could respect a thing like that. Then the weather changed. Not with a storm, not with thunder and a wall of rain. It changed the way a face changes when the smile is removed. The air grew still. The waves grew flatter. The horizon became a hard line, like a blade held steady. The sun stayed hidden behind milky cloud, and the light turned anemic. Even our voices sounded muffled, swallowed by the damp. On the 33rd day, we crossed into waters none of our charts named. The compass wavered like a drunk. The helmsman cursed and thumped its glass, as if insult could make iron honest. The crew grew quieter. Men began to stand at the rail for long stretches, staring north. Not scanning for land, just staring, as if waiting for something to rise. Captain Varric Dane kept his confidence like a coat he refused to remove. He was a hard man with a soft voice, the sort who did not waste anger on what could not be threatened. "Keep your hands busy," he told the crew. "Fear eats idle men." Then he turned to me and asked for a different kind of medicine. "Talk to them," he said. "You're the Holy One." "I'm not a chaplain," I replied. "You're the closest thing to one that I brought," he said, not unkindly. "And you don't smell like wine." So I talked. I walked the deck and spoke of endurance and purpose. I repeated the words my teachers had given me. The light watches. The light guides. The light knows your name. It felt strange saying those things with the wind so dead and the sky so pale. Even the candles in my little corner of the hold burned poorly, their flames low and blue at the base. By the time the ice appeared, we were already hollowed out. It began as flecks, like shattered glass floating past the bow. Then it became plates, slow-moving islands, bumping gently against the far wind's hull. The sea grew thicker, reluctant. The ship's pace slowed. Men leaned over the side and poked the ice with gaff hooks, watching it crack with clean, bright fractures. There should have been awe. There should have been cheers. We were seeing what no one in our ports had seen. We were reaching a northern edge that only rumors described. But the first sight of that ice did not feel like discovery. It felt like a boundary being quietly closed behind us. On the 41st day, the lookout cried out, and every man on deck looked where he pointed. Land. A line of white and black. Jagged shapes like broken teeth. Mountains rising under cloud, their slopes wrapped in snow that did not shine. The coast looked dead, not empty. Dead. Even from a distance I could sense it. The absence of birds. The lack of the usual restless motion that makes shorelines seem alive. Someone whispered, Northrend, as if speaking the name too loud would wake it. We pushed closer, and the air sharpened. It cut the lungs. It made every breath a small injury. Our beards grew stiff with frost. Our eyelids felt heavy, as if weighted. The sea itself seemed to lose color, becoming a dark sheet under white slabs of ice. Captain Dane ordered the far wind anchored in a sheltered inlet, where cliffs blocked the worst of the wind. The anchor chain rattled down and vanished into black water. When the ship settled, it did not feel secure. It felt like a nail driven into something that could bleed. We lowered the boats. The oars creaked. Men grunted, breath steaming. I went with the first landing party because my hands were needed, and because I did not trust the officers to keep themselves alive out of pride. The shore was not sand. It was stone and ice fused together, slick and uneven. Our boots slipped. The cold came up through the soles like a living thing. We pulled the boats up as far as we could, then turned to face the land. There was a smell. That was the first wrongness, beyond the emptiness. Not the clean smell of snow and rock. This was a sour, metallic stink, like old blood rubbed into iron. It hung in the air without moving, as if the wind refused to touch it. We advanced in a ragged line, muskets and spears ready. Our torch flames struggled, bending low, their light swallowed quickly. The cliffs loomed on either side. Ahead, the land rose gently into a field of ice, cracked and ridged. In the distance stood shapes that made my stomach tighten. At first they looked like posts. Then I realized they were bodies. They were frozen upright, half buried in the ice as if the land had grown around them. Some were human, some were not. Broad-shouldered brutes with tusks, leaner forms with long limbs and strange armor. Their faces were locked in expressions that no living throat could hold. Some looked angry, some looked pleading, some looked almost calm, as if relieved. Driven into many of those corpses were blades, not spears, not stakes, swords, great runed weapons, their metal dark and their edges pale. The runes carved into them were not decorative. They looked like wounds in the iron, filled with a faint, sickly glow that did not flicker like firelight. The blades pinned flesh to ice with a ritual precision. One body had 3 of them, arranged like a triangle through the chest and shoulders. Another had a single sword through the mouth. as if someone had wanted to silence it forever. Lieutenant Harrow, a man who bragged of bravery in taverns, stood very still. "What war was fought here?" he whispered. No one answered. The ice did not look like a battlefield. It looked like a training ground, like a place where death was arranged, studied, improved. The corpses were too evenly spaced, the blades too deliberate. The land itself felt marked, scarred, as if being prepared. My fingers inside thick gloves began to ache with more than cold. The light in me, that quiet warmth I could usually summon, felt distant, as if muffled by heavy cloth. We moved among the bodies. Each step crunched, not just ice but something brittle beneath. Bone fragments, teeth. Bits of armor snapped clean by frost and time. One of the sailors, a boy named Jory with freckles and a laugh that still sounded young, reached toward a ruined blade. I grabbed his wrist. "Don't," I said. He blinked at me. "It's just a sword." "No," I said, and hated how certain I sounded. "It's a nail. Leave it where it is." He pulled back, frowning, and I saw a thin sheen of frost on the blade's hilt that looked almost like rime, almost like breath. We pressed onward, toward a low rise. Beyond it, the land opened into a wide glacier, its surface smooth in places and broken in others, like a frozen sea paused mid-wave. The horizon was a wall of white, and above it, the sky hung low, bruised. That was when we saw them. At first, I thought they were men, figures moving across the ice in a line, evenly spaced, their pace measured. Then the torches caught them, and I saw the way their joints moved. Too clean, too stiff, like puppets pulled by invisible strings. Undead. The word rose in me, not as a learned term, but as a memory of old sermons and whispered cautionary tales. I had treated wounded soldiers before. I had watched men die. I had never watched the dead walk. They wore armor crusted with ice. Some carried spears. Some carried swords that looked like cousins to the runeblades pinning the corpses. Their faces were gray and shrunken. Eyes burned with a pale blue light that did not blink. Their mouths were slack, but I could feel a hunger in them, the way you can feel a storm before it breaks. They marched in perfect formation. No chatter, no hesitation. A patrol, not a horde. That was what chilled me most. Disorder I could understand. This was discipline. This was training. Lieutenant Harrow raised his musket. Captain Dane, who had come ashore behind us, snapped, "Hold!" The undead halted as one. Their heads turned toward us in unison. The motion was smooth, almost respectful. They did not charge. They did not roar. They simply stared, as if assessing. Then the wind shifted. It came from the north, a sudden cold gust that made our torches bow. It carried with it a sound. Not close. Far away. A horn, long and mournful, its notes stretched like grief over miles of ice. It was not a battle call. It was a lament. It made the hair at the back of my neck rise under my hood. The undead patrol, still staring at us, broke its gaze. As one, they turned their heads north towards that distant sound and stood listening. In that moment, with those dead faces angled toward an unseen horizon, they looked less like monsters and more like soldiers awaiting orders. Something in my chest tightened, an irrational urge to stand straighter. to listen too, as if I might understand what they heard. The horn faded. The wind stilled again. The undead looked back to us. They did not move forward. They did not retreat. They stood, and I realized with a sick lurch that they were not here to fight us. They were here to watch us. Captain Dane's voice was low. Back to the boats, slow, no sudden moves. We retreated step by careful step, eyes fixed on the patrol. My breath rasped in my throat. The cold felt like teeth. Jory stumbled, caught himself, and the undead did not react. They remained statues. When we reached the ridge and the corpses pinned by runeblades, I expected the patrol to follow. It did not. It turned as one and marched away along the glacier's edge, disappearing into a haze of blowing snow, their formation unbroken. We returned to the far wind with the kind of silence that follows a funeral. Men climbed aboard without speaking. The crew left on deck watched our faces and did not ask questions, because the answers were already written in our eyes. That night, Captain Dane gathered the officers, and for reasons I still do not understand, he invited me. Perhaps he wanted a witness. Perhaps he wanted a conscience. Or perhaps he simply wanted someone who knew how to close a man's eyes if the meeting went badly. In the captain's cabin, lantern light pooled on maps and damp wood. Dane traced the coastline with a calloused finger. "We're not alone," he said, "but we're not under attack. Not yet." Lieutenant Harrow wanted to leave. "We saw enough. We can report this and return with an army." "You think you can return?" said First Mate Selk, a hard woman with braided hair and a scar across her chin. "You think the sea will let us simply turn around after we've looked at it?" Harrow slammed his fist. "Superstition." Selk's eyes narrowed. "Call it whatever you like. I call it experience." Dane looked at me. "You've seen undead before?" I swallowed. "Not like that." "What are they?" Harrow demanded. I chose my words carefully. "They are not mindless. They are organized. They listened to something. They obeyed." Harrow scoffed. "Undead obey nothing." "Then why did they turn north when that horn sounded?" I asked quietly. The cabin fell still. The lantern flame fluttered. Dane leaned back, exhaling slowly. "We came for new land," he said. "But this isn't land. This is a camp, a fortress, a graveyard built like a drill yard." He looked down at the map again, as if the ink might confess something. "Tomorrow we explore inland. We find shelter. We find wood, if any exists. We find answers. We do not panic." His gaze swept the room. "And we do not touch any strange weapons we find." The next days were a blur of cold labor. We erected a shore camp with tents reinforced by extra canvas and packed snow. We built a low wall of ice blocks. We kept fires burning with precious coal brought from the ship because there was no wood. The flames were small and angry, like animals kept in cages. Men's lips cracked, fingers numbed. A sailor lost 2 toes to frostbite because he refused to admit pain. I cut them off with a saw while he wept and apologized to me for bleeding on my coat. I told him the light forgave him. I did not know if that was true. It was simply what I had left to offer. We explored in groups, always armed, always wary, always feeling watched. The land gave nothing freely. Even sound felt stolen. Footsteps on snow were too loud. Voices carried strangely. Sometimes you would speak and hear your own words echo back from a direction that made no sense, as if the ice itself had chosen to repeat you. On the fourth day, ashore we found the shrine. It sat in a shallow valley between ridges, half buried under drifted snow. Its stones were dark, slick with ice, carved with old symbols worn by wind. A series of pillars formed a semicircle around a central dais. Upon that dais was a relief carved into black stone. A figure knelt. Even in crude lines, I could see the posture. A young man, shoulders tense, head bowed. His hair in the carving was a cascade of gold, stylized into sharp lines. Before him rose a throne of ice, jagged and impossible, like frozen waves turned to blades. The face of the kneeling figure had been ruined, not by time, by intention. Someone had taken tools and hacked and scraped until the features were gone. The rest of the carving remained intact. The hair, the hands, the bowed shoulders. Only the face was erased, as if whoever did it feared being seen by stone eyes. Jory stood close, breath fogging. "Who would do that?" he murmured. "Someone who knew him," Selk said, voice tight. I stepped nearer, my gloved fingers hovering over the gouged stone. The damage was old. The cuts had been smoothed by wind, yet looking at it made my stomach turn, as if I were witnessing a crime still happening. Around the shrine were smaller carvings, figures in armor, a crown held aloft, a ship on dark water, a sword raised to the sky. I tried to interpret them the way I had been taught to interpret scripture. Symbol and meaning, lesson and warning. But the shrine did not feel like a warning. It felt like a promise. That night we returned to camp with the image burned into our thoughts. Men spoke less. Even the usual complaints about rations and cold were muted. The aurora danced faintly above the horizon like bruised light. The wind scraped at tent walls with dry fingers. I lay in my tent, wrapped in furs, listening to the far wind's distant hull creak in the inlet. Sleep came in shallow bites. Sometime near midnight, a scream tore through camp. It was not a startled shout. It was a full-throated, ragged wail, the sound of a man being ripped open from the inside. I lurched upright, heart hammering. Outside, boots thudded, voices shouted. I grabbed my satchel and ran into the cold. The scream came from the tent of Olin Rusk, a sailor with broad hands and a habit of humming while he worked. Two men held him down as he thrashed, eyes wide, face white in lantern light. Foam flecked his lips. His fingers clawed at the air as if trying to seize something invisible. He screamed a name, over and over with the same broken cadence. "Arthas!" he cried. "Arthas! Arthas! Arthas!" The men restraining him looked terrified, not of his strength, but of the sound itself. Captain Dane pushed through the crowd. "What's wrong with him?" "I don't know," Selk said, breath harsh. "He woke up like this." I knelt beside Olin, pressing a hand to his forehead. His skin was cold, but not from the air. A different cold. A deep cold, as if his blood had been replaced with meltwater. "Olin," I said firmly, "look at me. You're safe. You're here with us." His eyes darted, unfocused. Then, for a heartbeat, they fixed on mine. And in that instant, I saw something behind them. Not madness, not fever. Recognition. As if he knew me and pitied me and wanted to warn me but could only do it through that one name. "Arthas," he whispered, softer now, like a prayer. Then he began screaming again, the name turning into a raw chant. "No one here is named Arthas," Lieutenant Harrow snapped, as if irritation could solve terror. "Shut him up!" I slapped Harrow before I could stop myself. My hand stung. The tent went silent for one shocked breath. Captain Dane's gaze flicked to me. He did not reprimand me. He simply said, "Do what you can." I mixed a draft with shaking fingers. Poppy milk, a few drops of frost leaf tincture, bitter and strong. I pried Olin's jaw open and poured it in. He gagged, swallowed, coughed, then sagged as the drug took hold. His screams faded into hoarse sobs. The name still fell from his lips, quieter, like a lullaby meant for a monster. When he finally slept, the camp did not return to rest. Men huddled near fires, staring into flames that did not warm their eyes. Some whispered about curses, some whispered about spirits, some stared north, toward the empty white. I returned to my tent and tried to pray again. The words felt wrong in my mouth, as if they belonged to another man. I found myself thinking of the shrine, of the golden hair carved in stone, of the face scraped away. In the hours before dawn, when the world was nothing but dark and frost, I heard something outside. Not footsteps. A voice. It came on the wind, slipping between tent flaps, threading through cracks in canvas. It did not shout. It did not command. It spoke as if leaning close to my ear, intimate, almost kind. Kaelin. I froze. My breath hitched. No one outside knew my name in that tone. On the far wind, I was chirurgeon, or priest, or thorn. Kaelin was what my mother had whispered when she held me as a child. Kaelin, it said again, soft as falling snow. I gripped the small symbol of the light I wore on a chain. The metal was cold, but it steadied me. "Who are you?" I whispered, feeling foolish. The voice seemed to smile, not with lips, but with intention. "You came so far," it murmured. "You must be tired of doubt." My heart hammered. I told myself it was wind, a trick of exhaustion. The mind, deprived of warmth and sleep, making patterns out of noise. But the voice continued, threading itself into my thoughts like a needle. "There is purpose here. There is glory. There is a place for you beyond pain." I pressed my hands to my ears. The voice was not in the air. It was inside, behind my eyes, where prayers are supposed to live. It did not threaten. It invited. And the most terrible thing was that some part of me, the part that had been carrying dying men's confessions and watching the dead stand like soldiers, wanted to listen. I whispered the litany of dawn, words meant to banish darkness. The voice faded, not fleeing, but retreating like a courteous guest who knows it will be welcomed later. When morning came, the camp looked unchanged. Snow, ice, gray light. Men moving slowly, speaking little. But something in their eyes had shifted. Not all of them. Just enough to make me notice. A new focus. A hunger of a different kind. Captain Dane ordered another scouting party. We needed food. We needed something besides salt and biscuit. We needed a reason to believe we could survive here without becoming part of the ICE's collection. I went with Selk and Jory and 6 others, including Olin, pale and shaken, but insisting he was fine. He would not meet my eyes. He kept touching his own throat, as if feeling for a wound that was not there. We moved deeper inland, following a ridge that offered some shelter from wind. The ice here was smoother, like glass. In places, it was clear enough to see down into it. That was where we noticed the bodies beneath, not like the ones pinned upright near the shore. These were sealed under the glacier, suspended as if swimming. Hundreds of them, preserved in perfect clarity. Arms outstretched, mouths open, eyes wide, frozen mid-scream. Their armor was intact, their weapons held tight. Some wore crowns of bone, some wore priestly vestments now stiff with frost. They were not random dead. They were arranged, layer upon layer, like offerings placed carefully in a sacred pantry. "Sweet light," Jory whispered, voice cracking. Selk's jaw clenched. "Keep moving." We did, because stopping felt like admitting what it meant. The scourge, that old word from old stories, rose in my mind. A plague of death, a force that turned bodies into tools. We had thought those tales were meant to scare children into obedience. Now I was walking over a grave that looked like a larder. Near midday, as the gray light shifted almost imperceptibly, we saw another patrol, more undead, more disciplined. They marched across a distant slope, their silhouettes stark against snow. They did not angle toward us. They did not react to our presence at all. But as they passed a ridge, one of them turned its head slightly, and I felt its gaze brush my skin like a cold fingertip. Olin stumbled. He caught himself on his spear, breathing hard. "They're letting us," he whispered. "Letting us what?" I asked. He swallowed, eyes wide. "Walk." I wanted to deny it, to say we were simply unimportant. But the way the patrol moved, the way it maintained distance without retreating, suggested calculation, like shepherds keeping wolves from straying too far before the slaughter. We found a fissure in the ice, a crack that opened into a shallow cavern beneath the glacier. Cold air poured from it like breath from a tomb. Inside, the ice walls were smooth and glittering. Our torches cast warped reflections. It felt like walking inside a frozen throat. At the far end of that cavern, half embedded in a wall of ice, was a blade. It was not like the runeblades we had seen pinning corpses. This one was longer, its shape elegant, its metal pale as moonlight. Runes crawled along it in spirals that made my eyes hurt. The ice around it was clear and strangely unmarred, as if it had grown to protect the weapon rather than trap it. Even from several paces away, I heard a hum, not audible like a string vibrating, a sensation, a tremor in my teeth, a yearning in my bones. Jory stepped closer, mesmerized. "It's beautiful." "No," Selk said sharply, grabbing his shoulder. "Back." But Jory's hand moved anyway, as if pulled. I lunged, but I was too late. His gloved fingers brushed the exposed hilt. The hum surged. The torches flared, then guttered low. Jory's eyes rolled back, and he went rigid, standing straight as a mast, hand still on the hilt. I shouted his name. He did not respond. Then he spoke, voice not his own, calm, cold, certain. "A crown," he said. "A vow. A kingdom saved." His words fogged in the air, and in that fog I thought I saw shapes. A throne of ice, a hall filled with kneeling shadows, a blade raised above a friend's neck. Jory's lips moved again. "Betrayal," he whispered, and the word sounded like a sacrament. Selk struck his hand away from the hilt. The moment contact broke, Jory collapsed, gasping, clutching his head. His pupils were wide, almost black. He looked at us as if we were strangers. "What did you see?" I demanded, kneeling, gripping his shoulders. He shivered violently. I don't know. I saw a man. Golden hair." His breath hitched. He was crying. He said he had to do it. He said he had to save them, no matter what it cost. Olin made a strangled sound. He backed away from the blade, eyes fixed on it with terror and longing. "It wants," he whispered. "It's hungry." I stared at the chuptakon, weapon encased in ice, and the hum seemed to answer, vibrating through the soles of my boots. It did not feel like simple magic. It felt like appetite given form. Selk's face was pale. "We leave. Now." We turned, torches shaking, and hurried out of the cavern. Behind us, the hum lingered in the air, faint but persistent, like the memory of a song you cannot forget. As we made our way back toward camp, the snow began to fall harder. Wind picked up, swirling into sheets. Visibility shrank. The world became white and gray and motion. And in that blizzard, the voice returned. Not in my ear this time. In all of us. I saw it in the way Jory flinched, the way Olin's eyes filled with tears, the way one of the older sailors, Bram, began to smile faintly, as if hearing comforting news. "Come," the voice said, warm as a hearth in the cold. "Come closer. You are so near to meaning." Selk shouted, "Don't listen!" But her words sounded small against the wind. The voice did not command, it offered. It promised an end to the grinding doubt that ate men from the inside. It promised that suffering could become purpose, that fear could become devotion, that all the ugly choices we had made in life could be made holy by one final, perfect act. I clenched my jaw until it ached. I forced my mind to focus on simple things. Breath, step, the sting in my cheeks, the weight of my satchel. I began to recite prayers aloud, not caring who heard. The words were thin, but they were mine. We reached the ridge above camp at dusk. The far wind was a dark shape in the inlet. Smoke rose from our small fires. For a moment, relief surged. Then I saw movement on the glaciers beyond. Rows of figures. Undead. Dozens. Hundreds. They stood at a distance, perfectly still. Watching. Not approaching. Not leaving. They were herding us, keeping us in a pocket of land between ice and sea, like animals penned before slaughter. I ran down toward camp, shouting warnings. Men emerged, weapons raised. Captain. Dane's face hardened as he saw the ranks in the distance. "They're massing," Harrow said, voice tight with fear. Dane shook his head slowly. "No," he murmured. "They're waiting." As if on cue, a distant horn sounded again from the north, long and mournful, and every undead head turned toward it in unison, their silent discipline more terrifying than any scream. Every undead head turned toward it in unison, their silent discipline more terrifying than any scream. The horn's note faded, but the air kept vibrating as if the sound had sunk into the ice and was still traveling beneath our feet. I stood with the others at the edge of camp, my hands clenched around my satchel strap, the leather stiff as wood. Men beside me raised muskets and crossbows, but their shoulders sagged with the knowledge that metal and powder meant little against a thing that did not fear dying. Captain Dane stared at the ranks for a long moment. He did not blink. "No shots," he said. "Not unless they move." Lieutenant Harrow looked like he might argue, but Selk's hand tightened on his arm. "He's right," she said, low. "You shoot. You give them permission." "Permission?" Harrow snapped, but his voice cracked on the word. Dane's gaze did not leave the glacier. "They've had permission the whole time," he murmured. "They're choosing not to use it." That idea was worse than any attack. An enemy you can fight is an enemy who acknowledges you. An enemy that withholds violence is an enemy that owns the pace of your heartbeat. The undead remained still, arranged in long, straight rows that followed the curve of the ice like fence lines. Their armor caught the dim light and returned it as a dull sheen. Between them, the wind threaded and did not disturb a single posture. They could have been statues carved for a mausoleum. Then one figure stepped forward. It moved out of the line with the same precision as the others, but it did not march. It walked. That difference made my skin crawl. It approached until it stood just within musket range, then stopped. It raised one arm slowly, palm outward. Not a threat, not a greeting, a signal. Behind it, the nearest ranks shifted their heads, as if listening to a silent command. They did not advance. They simply watched, patient as frost. The figure lowered its arm and pointed north. I felt my stomach drop, as if my body understood the meaning before my mind did. Olin, pale as snow, whispered beside me, "It wants us to go." Jory's eyes were huge. "Why would it?" Selk cut him off. "Because it's not done with us." The undead figure held its pointing arm steady. The gesture did not waver. It was not urging. It was indicating, like a host showing guests the way deeper into a house they should never enter. Captain Dane turned away from the glacier and faced the camp. His voice rose, carrying, "All hands, double the watches. Keep fires low. No one leaves the perimeter, alone. If you hear anything in the wind, you tell me or Chirurgeon Thorn, not Harrow, not your bunkmate. Me." A few men laughed nervously, but it died quickly. Laughter could not live long in that air. I moved through camp, checking on the injured, checking on the shivering, checking on Olin, who sat by a fire with his hands out as if hoping the flame would climb into his bones. His eyes tracked the northern horizon even when his head did not. "You're hearing it again," I said quietly. He flinched. "No, I'm not hearing anything." "You screamed a name," I said. His jaw clenched. "I don't know why." I sat beside him, careful not to crowd him. The fire threw weak light across his face. I could see every crack in his lips, every shadow under his eyes. "When you said it," I told him, "you weren't begging. You were calling." He swallowed hard. It felt like remembering someone I've never met. His breath trembled, like missing a man I should hate. That made my chest ache. "Dreams can do that," I lied. Olin's gaze finally met mine. "You don't believe that." I did not answer. The wind answered for me, hissing through the ice wall we'd built. A soft sound like distant applause. Night settled in fully. The aurora returned, faint green ribbons in the clouded dark, as if the sky itself had bruised and was trying to heal. Men huddled in tents. Watches paced with lanterns covered in cloth to hide their glow. The far wind sat in the inlet like a trapped animal, her mast rising into the darkness. I tried to sleep. I could not. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the shrine again. The kneeling prince. The faceless void. the throne of ice. I thought of the blade in the cavern, humming behind the glacier like a heart under ribs. And when I listened hard enough, I could almost feel that hum even here, faint but steady. Sometime in the deep hours, a watchman shouted. I burst from my tent, my boots half-laced, the song, cold slapping me awake. Men poured out around me, weapons up. At the edge of camp, near the ice wall, a figure stood. Not undead, a living man. He was alone, wearing torn furs, his beard crusted with ice. His skin was gray with cold, but his eyes were bright with panic. He held his hands up, palms open, and his fingers shook violently. "Don't shoot," he croaked. "Don't, please." Captain Dane approached, lantern held high. "Who are you?" The man's lips were blue. "From the Sea Strider," he gasped. We came months ago, His eyes flicked toward the glacier ranks beyond, visible even in darkness as darker shapes against snow. "They let me go." Dane's face tightened. "They let you go?" The survivor laughed, and it sounded like a sob. "They don't kill everyone," he whispered. "They keep some. They keep them like..." His eyes went unfocused, as if looking into a memory he hated. Like food, like prayers. Selk stepped closer, knife in hand. "Why are you here?" The man's gaze snapped to her. "Because the storm brought your scent. Because the wind told me you were new." He swallowed hard, throat bobbing. "Because if you go north, you won't come back. Not as men." Captain Dane's voice was steel. "Why didn't you leave? Why didn't you sail home?" The survivor's shoulders sagged. "We tried. The sea closed. Ice rose. The wind turned." He stared at the far wind in the inlet. "Your ship will not be allowed to leave until it wants you to leave." That sentence slid into my mind like a cold nail, aloud, as if the sea itself was part of the same discipline as the patrols. I stepped forward. "What's your name?" He blinked as if surprised by kindness. "Marin," he said hoarsely. "Marin Vale." I offered him my canteen. His hands shook so badly he spilled half the water, but he drank anyway, eyes rolling with relief. "What is up there?" Jory asked, unable to keep quiet. "What's north?" Marin's gaze snapped to him, his expression twisted. "A throne," he whispered. "Not stone, not wood. Ice. Pure ice that doesn't melt. And it listens." Men shifted uncomfortably. Harrow scoffed, but his eyes were wide. Marin continued, words spilling like blood. "We found bodies pinned with runeblades, like you did. We thought it was a warning." He laughed again, bitter. "It was practice. They were practicing what they'll do to the world." "Who are they?" Captain Dane demanded. Marin's mouth worked. "The Scourge," he said, and several men made the sign of the light instinctively. "But the Scourge is waiting. It's incomplete, like a bow without an arrow, like a crown without a head." The name Olin had screamed rose in my throat. I did not want to speak it. I did not want to give it weight. But Marin spoke it for me. "Arthas," he whispered. The camp went utterly still. Olin made a strangled sound and Tsang clutched his own throat. Jory stared at Marin. "How do you know that name?" Marin's eyes filled with tears, freezing on his lashes. "I don't know how I know," he said. It's just there, in the wind, in the ice, in my dreams." He shook his head, frantic. "None of us knew it when we came. Then the night started whispering it into our bones until we couldn't say anything else." Captain Dane's voice lowered. "What happened to your crew?" Marin's breath hitched. "They didn't kill us right away," he said, and that was the worst part of his story. "They drove us, like cattle. We would wake and find tracks in the snow leading us forward, and if we didn't follow, if we tried to turn back," he swallowed, "they would appear behind us, not attacking, just standing, waiting until we moved again." He looked at Dane with desperate intensity. "They want you to reach something. They want you to see it. They want you to understand what you're being offered." "Offered?" Selk spat. Marin nodded, trembling. "It speaks," he whispered. "Not like a commander, like a friend, like a voice you've wanted your whole life." His eyes darted around camp as if the air might punish him for saying too much. "It promises glory. It promises purpose. It promises you'll never doubt again." My stomach clenched. The voice in the blizzard, the way it had used my name, the way it had sounded like warmth. "How did you escape?" I asked softly. Marin's expression went blank for a moment. "I didn't," he said. Then his face twisted in horror. "It let me go, like a message, like bait." The wind rose suddenly, snapping the canvas of tents. Marin flinched hard as if struck. He began to whisper, "Arthas," under his breath. I grabbed his shoulders. "Marin, look at me." His eyes rolled toward mine. "He's coming," he whispered, voice thin. "He's coming to finish it. That's what the horn means. That's what the kneeling means. That's why they don't kill you. They're saving you." "Saving us for what?" Jory asked, voice breaking. Marin smiled, and it was the saddest thing I have ever seen. "For the coronation," he whispered. Then he screamed. It was sudden and violent, his body arching backward. The scream was not just fear. It was pain, as if something inside his skull was being twisted. Men backed away. Captain Dane reached for him, but Marin's hands clawed the air, fingers bent at impossible angles. He screamed the name again and again. "Arthas! Arthas! Arthas!" His eyes went white. Frost spread across his beard like fast-growing mold. I felt the cold around him deepen, like the air itself recoiling. I tried to force the poppy draft between his teeth, but his jaw locked. Selk held him down with grim strength, her face tight with fury and fear. "Light preserve him," I muttered. But the words felt like throwing water at a house fire. Marin's scream broke into a wet gurgle. His body went still. I pressed my fingers to his neck. No pulse. For a heartbeat, there was only the wind. Then Marin's eyes snapped open. A pale blue light burned behind them. Men stumbled backward, shouting. Muskets lifted. Someone fired by accident. The shot cracking in the cold and echoing off cliffs. The thing using Marin sat up slowly. His joints moved stiffly at first, then smoother, as if remembering how to be a puppet. He looked at us, his mouth opened, and the voice that came out was not hoarse, not frightened. It was calm, almost gentle. "North," it said. "Come." Captain Dane raised his pistol with shaking hands. "What are you?" Marin's lips curved slightly, a parody of a smile. "A door," it said. A lantern. A guide. Selk's knife flashed. She lunged forward and drove the blade into Marin's heart. The body jerked, but it did not collapse. Selk twisted, snarling, and yanked her knife free. Black. Fluid oozed, thick and slow, freezing as it touched air. Marin's head tilted. He seemed amused. "You cannot stop waiting," he said softly. Then he toppled backward and lay still. The blue light faded from his eyes. No one spoke for a long time. Even Harrow was silent. Captain Dane lowered his pistol, breathing hard. "Burn him," he said finally. Men hesitated. Burning a corpse felt like blasphemy, but leaving it felt worse. We built a fire pit outside camp, fed it coal and oil, and laid Marin in it. The flames took him reluctantly, licking at his furs, then catching. A stench rose, thick and wrong, not like burning flesh, but like burning spoiled meat mixed with old incense. The smoke drifted north, as if drawn. As Marin's body blackened, the horn sounded again, distant and mournful. Every man froze. Eyes turned to the glacier ranks. The undead did not move, but slowly, as if obeying an unseen rhythm, they sank to one knee, rows upon rows, kneeling toward the northern horizon. Not to us, not to any living commander, to something that was not here yet. My hands began to shake. I tucked them under my arms, trying to hide it, but Selk saw. Her eyes were hard. "This land," she whispered to me, "doesn't want us dead." "What does it want?" I managed. Selk stared north. "Witnesses," she said, "or offerings." After that night, the expedition changed. The officers still spoke of supplies, routes, and defenses, but their words were thin paper over a deeper truth. We were no longer explorers. We were intruders in a place that did not care about intrusion. It cared about timing. Captain Dane called a council at dawn. His face looked carved from exhaustion. "We leave," he said. "We load what we can. We sail at first break in ice." Harrow exhaled, relief sharp as a cough. "Finally." Selk did not look relieved. "And if the sea doesn't open?" Dane's jaw tightened. "Then we break it. We burn coal. We force our way out." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe muscle and iron could bully this coast into releasing us. But when I walked down to the inlet and looked at the far wind, I saw the truth. Ice had formed around her hull overnight. Thick plates. Not drift ice. New ice. It clung like a hand. The sea was closing. Men chopped at it with axes. They poured boiling water. They hammered iron bars. The ice cracked, but it did not yield. Each time they cleared a section, more frost crept in, knitting it shut again. It was as if the water itself was choosing to harden, choosing to hold the ship. Captain Dane watched, face unreadable. Then he turned to me. "How many can you keep alive if we go inland?" he asked. The question hit me like a fist. "What?" "If the sea won't open," he said quietly, "then north is the only direction left. And whatever's north, it wants us to come." My throat tightened. "You're considering walking into it?" "I'm considering not freezing here while waiting for mercy that will not come," he said. Behind him, the glacier ranks still knelt in the distance, unmoving, patient as stone. And somewhere beyond them, beyond the ridges and the white horizon, something listened. That evening, as we debated fate and logistics, Olin came to me with blood on his hands. Not his blood. He was trembling, eyes wide, breath fast. "Kaelin," he whispered, using my name like a plea. I think I hurt someone." I grabbed his wrists. The blood was fresh, dark against pale snow. "Where?" He pointed toward the far side of camp, near the supply tents. I ran with him. There, behind stacked crates, lay Bram, the older sailor who had smiled in the blizzard. His throat was cut clean. His eyes stared up at the gray sky, already frosting. Olin sank to his knees, sobbing. "I don't remember doing it," he gasped. "I swear, I don't remember." I looked at the wound. It was too precise for a drunken brawl, too deliberate. Selkin arrived, took one look, and grabbed Olin by the collar. "You did this?" Olin shook his head violently. "No, I woke up with the knife in my hand, and the name in my mouth." "What name?" Selk demanded, though she already knew. Olin's lips trembled. "Arthas," he whispered. Selk released him as if burned. Captain Dane came, face hard. He looked at Bram's body, then at Olin, then at me. "Is he lying?" I stared at Olin's terror and felt the cold truth settle in my bones. "I don't think so," I said. "I think something is using him." Harrow raised his pistol. "Then we put him down." Olin looked up, eyes begging. "Please," he whispered. "Please don't. I don't want—" I stepped between them without thinking. "If you kill him," I said, voice shaking, "you may be doing exactly what it wants." Harrow's face twisted. "You want to keep a murderer?" "I want to keep a man who is being turned into a message," I snapped. Dane held up a hand. "No executions," he said slowly. "Not yet." Harrow glared but lowered the pistol. Dane's gaze locked on me. "Can you stop it?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to give him certainty. But the truth was a bitter thing. "I don't know," I admitted. That night we bound Olin's wrists and placed him under watch. He wept until sleep took him. Men avoided looking at him. They looked at the north instead, as if the horizon were a judge. I sat by the fire, staring at my hands, and realized something that made my stomach turn. The scourge wasn't killing us because it didn't need to. It was letting us unravel each other, turning fear into knives, turning dreams into violence, hurting us not just with undead patrols, but with our own minds, our own guilt, our own longing for an end to doubt. And the invitation in the blizzard was not meant to seduce one man. It was meant to soften all of us. So that when the true champion came, when the one the land waited for finally arrived, we would already be ready to kneel. I looked toward the glacier ranks again. They were standing now, silent, facing north, as if listening for the next horn. And in the wind, so faint I could almost pretend it was imagination, I heard my name spoken with gentle certainty. "Kaelin, come." I tried to answer the wind with prayer, but the cold swallowed every syllable like it was food. I stayed by the fire until my eyes burned, watching sparks rise and die. Men slept in fits. The camp sounded like a sick animal, all coughs and muttered nightmares and the occasional soft sob someone thought no one could hear. Near dawn, the horn sounded again. It was farther this time. Or maybe it was the same distance and my ears' scores were changing. It rolled over the ridges, stretched long across the ice, and settled into my bones like a second spine. Every man who heard it sat up, even those who had been dead asleep. I saw heads lift inside tents as if yanked by strings. Then the undead moved, not the patrols we'd watched, not the distant ranks standing like fence posts. These came from behind the ridges, pouring down in lines, not rushing, not stumbling, but marching with a calm that made them seem endless. They stopped well beyond musket range and formed a wide crescent around our camp. They did not close the ring. They left a gap. The gap pointed north. Captain Dane came out with his coat half-fastened, eyes bloodshot. He stared at the crescent and the deliberate opening. "They're not trapping us," he said hoarsely. "They're steering us." Selk's voice was flat. Like Marin said, men raised weapons anyway. Some aimed at the undead, some aimed at the gap, as if whatever waited in that direction was worse. I saw Harrow's hands shake on his pistol. I saw Jory's lips moving, silent words, maybe prayers, maybe something else. The undead did not lift a single blade. They simply stood, patient, until Captain Dane did what they wanted. He ordered the Safkuha, camp broken. We worked like condemned men. Canvas folded with numb fingers, crates lashed, coal sacks hoisted. The far wind remained locked in new ice, her hull hugged tight by frozen plates that creaked softly, like teeth grinding. We could not move her. We could not even properly board her without chiseling a path. The ship that had carried our courage north now felt like a coffin we were not allowed to close. Dane's face was gray when he made the final call. "We take what we can carry," he said. "We go inland. We find higher ground. We find anything that can shelter us from wind. We do not spread out. We do not chase sounds. If you hear your mother calling you from the snow, you ignore it." A few men laughed in the wrong way. Too sharp, too quick, like panic wearing a smile. I went to Olin. He sat on a crate, wrists bound, guarded by two sailors who looked like they wanted to run. His eyes were red from crying. He looked at me like a man waiting to be struck. "I didn't do it," he whispered before I spoke. "I know," I said, though knowing did not fix anything. He swallowed hard. "It's in my dreams. It's in my mouth. It makes my tongue feel heavy, like it's not mine." I crouched. "Listen to me," I said quietly. "When it comes, when you feel it trying to move you, you tell me. You fight. You don't give it your hands." Olin laughed weakly. "Fight," he whispered. "Kaelin, it's like fighting the tide with a spoon." I had no answer for that. I simply tightened the knot on his bindings and prayed my hands were not tightening a noose. We marched north. Our footprints trailed behind like a confession. The wind pushed at our backs, not harsh, but steady, as if the land itself was exhaling to keep us moving. The undead crescent did not follow close. They stayed far to either side, silhouettes on ridges, appearing when we tried to angle away from the path and vanishing when we returned. Herding, exactly like Marin said. Not killing. Preserving. On the first day inland, the cold became a living adversary. It was not just temperature, it was pressure. It felt like the sky was lowering, like ice was stacking on my shoulders. Men's breaths turned into constant fog that hung in front of their faces, making every expression look haunted. Our beards and brows crusted white. The world narrowed to a tunnel of trudging boots and creaking leather. We passed more pinned corpses, not just at the shore, everywhere, along ridges, in shallow valleys. On the edges of crevasses where the ice was thin enough to see blue depths below. Some were so old, their flesh had shrunk away from their bones, but the runeblades still held them upright, still thrust into rib cages and skulls with a grim care. In a few places, the blades were arranged in patterns, lines, arcs, a spiral that made me dizzy when I looked too long. The runes on the metal glowed faintly, like coals under ash. Jory gagged once and had to stop to breathe. Selk put a hand on his shoulder. "Don't look at their faces," she said. "Look at your feet." But the faces were hard to avoid. They had that frozen clarity. They looked like men caught in the exact moment they understood it was too late. At midday, the horn sounded again, and the undead patrols we sometimes glimpsed on far ridges all halted at once. Even at a distance, even through blowing snow, I could see the synchronization. It was a drill. It was reverence. It was obedience to something beyond sight. That night we huddled in a shallow depressions behind a ridge. We pitched tents, but the wind still found its way in, threading cold through seams and turning canvas into stiff skin. Fires were small. Coal was precious. Men chewed biscuit that tasted like chalk and swallowed hard, eyes darting north whenever the gusts shifted. I lay awake, listening. The voice came again, not loud, not dramatic. It did not need theatrics. It was intimate, patient, certain of its eventual victory. "You are tired of holding broken men together," it whispered in my mind. "You are tired of mending what cannot be mended." I clenched my jaw. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood, just to have something real. I whispered prayers. I imagined warm sunlight. I imagined my mother's hands. The voice did not retreat this time. It simply waited until my prayers faltered. "There is a place where your hands will never tremble," it murmured. "There is a purpose that makes every stitch holy. There is an end to doubt." My throat tightened. Doubt had been my companion for years. Doubt about faith. Doubt about my worth. Doubt about whether the light listened, or whether it was just a word men used to decorate their fear. The voice touched that doubt like a finger tracing a bruise. "You came north because some part of you wanted truth," it said. "Here is truth. Here is the only honesty left." I pressed my forehead to the frozen ground and whispered, "Leave me." The voice seemed almost amused. "I will," it said gently, "when you no longer want me to." The next morning, Bram's body was gone. We had wrapped him the night before, placed him away from the tents, weighted with stones so wind would not uncover him. Now the stones were scattered, and the cloth lay open like shed skin. No tracks led away. The snow around it was smooth, unbroken. Men stared at the empty wrap with silent terror. Harrow swore. Selk's eyes narrowed. Captain Dane said nothing for a long time, then ordered us moving again. "He took him," Olin whispered, voice shaking. "Who?" Jory asked, already knowing. Olin's lips trembled. "The cold," he said. "The crown." We marched. The land began to rise. Ridges sharpened into cliffs. Ice gave way to rock in places, black stone jutting through snow like knuckles. The wind grew louder, not stronger, but more insistent, always from behind, always pushing north. It felt like being breathed on by a giant. On the third day, inland, we found a ruined outpost. It was not ours. The architecture was wrong. The stones were fitted too neatly. The angles too severe. Towers half collapsed under ice leaned like broken spears. A gatehouse stood open, its doors ripped away, leaving a mouth-shaped gap. Inside, we found signs of struggle: scratched stone, broken weapons, frozen blood, and bodies, not pinned upright. These lay where they fell, sprawled in halls and courtyards. Some wore armor I did not recognize, plate etched with designs that looked like lightning. Some were clothed in thick furs and carried curved blades. Some were undead already, but inert, collapsed like dolls with strings cut, their blue eyes dim. Captain Dane ordered a search. "There may be supplies," he said. "Wood, metal, anything." We moved through the ruins with weapons ready. Shadows seemed thicker here, trapped between walls. The air tasted old. In the central hall, beneath a cracked dome, we found another shrine. Smaller than the one near the coast, but the same image. The kneeling, golden-haired prince. The throne of ice. The face carved away. Someone had painted the throne with something dark, maybe blood, maybe oil. The stain had frozen into the stone, spreading like a bruise. Jory stared at the faceless carving, his eyes wet. "Why erase him?" he whispered. "Why not erase the throne?" Selk answered without looking away. "Because they don't want you to forget the throne," she said. "They want you to forget the man until he becomes whatever they need." A sound came then, soft and scraping, like metal dragged lightly across stone. We froze. Lantern light trembled. From behind a pillar emerged an undead figure unlike the patrols. It was taller. Its armor was cleaner, less corroded. Its movements were slower, deliberate, like someone wearing ceremony. A long cloak of stiffened cloth hung from its shoulders, rimed with frost. In its hands it carried a blade not raised, not threatening, but presented as if in offering. Its eyes burned blue, but there was something else in them. Not intelligence exactly. Expectation. Harrow lifted his pistol. "Shoot it," he hissed. Captain Dane held out a hand. "Wait." The undead figure stopped several paces away. It lowered itself to one knee. My breath caught. The gesture was so human, so ritual, that it made my skin prickle. The undead bowed its head. Then it lifted its sword and set it on the stone floor before it, sliding it forward toward us. A gift. Jory let out a small sound of disbelief. "It's trap," Selk said sharply. The undead's jaw moved. No sound came out. Then the air around us vibrated, and the voice arrived, not in my mind alone, but in the space between us, as if the cold itself spoke. "Take it," it said. "Understand." Men flinched. Some clutched their ears. Harrow swore and fired. The shot cracked. The bullet struck the undead in the shoulder. It jerked, then steadied. It did not fall. It did not retaliate. It remained kneeling, as if pain were irrelevant. Captain Dane's face tightened. "Stop!" he snapped at Harrow. "You'll wake everything in this place." "It's undead!" Harrow shouted, voice cracking. "It should be put down!" The voice in the air seemed to sigh. "Not yet," it murmured. "Not this one." The kneeling undead lifted its head again. It pushed the sword slightly closer, the metal scraping softly. I stepped forward before I knew I was moving. Selk grabbed my arm hard. "Don't," she hissed. "I won't touch it," I whispered back, though my heart was pounding. "But I need to see." I crouched near the sword, without placing a hand on it. The blade was long, dark, etched with runes that seemed to writhe when I tried to focus on them. Frost clung to it, but the frost looked neat, like lace on a corpse's collar. The hilt was wrapped in leather so old it looked like skin. I felt the hum again. Hunger. A quiet, steady craving. Images flickered behind my eyes without me touching the weapon. A crown on a man's head. A hall full of kneeling dead. A young prince kneeling before ice, tears freezing on his lashes. A sword raised. A friend's eyes wide with betrayal. A kingdom in flames. A whispered vow. I will save them. My stomach lurched. I backed away, gasping. The undead remained kneeling. Captain Dane's voice was hoarse. "What is this?" he demanded, not of me, but of the air. The voice answered with something that sounded like tenderness. A beginning, it said. A promise. A path. Selk stepped in front of me, blade in hand. "We don't want your path," she spat. The voice did not sound offended. "You do," it murmured. "You are already walking it." Then the wind outside the ruins rose suddenly. Snow roared against broken walls. The dome above us groaned. The kneeling undead stood in one smooth motion. It lifted the sword from the floor and turned away, walking toward a side passage. It did not hurry, it did not look back. It simply went, as if confident we would follow eventually. Captain Dane's jaw clenched. "We're not staying here," he said. "Gather what you can. We move." We found little. Most supplies were ruined by ice. But we did find one thing that made men whisper with hope. A stockpile of timber, blackened but usable, stacked in an inner courtyard protected from wind. We also found old coal, damp but burnable. We loaded what we could onto sledges made from broken doors and lashed beams. When we left the outpost, the undead patrols were there again, distant silhouettes on ridges, silent witnesses keeping us aligned. They did not harry us. They did not attack. They simply ensured we did not turn back. That night, Olin screamed again. He was bound, as always, wrists raw where rope bit. 2 men watched him, exhausted and frightened. I was jolted awake by his voice tearing through the camp like a knife. "Arthas!" he screamed. "Arthas! Arthas! Arthas!" I stumbled to his tent, heart hammering. Olin thrashed, eyes rolling, face slick with sweat that froze at his hairline. His voice changed mid-scream. It deepened, steadied, became a chant spoken through him rather than by him. "He must come," Olin's mouth said, and the words were not his. "He must finish what began." I grabbed his face in my hands, forcing him to look at me. "Olin!" I shouted. "Fight it!" His eyes focused for a heartbeat. Tears spilled. "Kalen," he gasped, his own voice returning. "It's showing me things. It's showing me a crown. It's showing me the end of pain." "Don't believe it," I said desperately. Olin laughed, a broken sound. "What if it's true?" he whispered. "What if doubt is the real curse?" Then his expression went blank again, and the other voice returned. "Bring them," it said through his lips, calm and inviting. "Bring them north. They are not to be wasted." Harrow pushed into the tent, pistol drawn. His eyes were wild. "Enough," he snarled. "We're feeding this by keeping him alive." Selk blocked him, knife ready. "Shoot him and you'll answer to me," she said. Harrow's gaze flicked to Captain Dane, who had arrived behind Selk. "Captain," Harrow pleaded, voice shaking, "it's taking us one by one." Dane stared at Olin for a long moment. His face looked older in the lantern light. Then he said quietly, "Not one by one." He turned and looked north, beyond the tents, beyond the ridge. "It's taking us all at once," he murmured. In the days that followed, men began to change. Not everyone, but enough. Some grew withdrawn, staring into distance for hours, lips moving silently. Some began to volunteer for the hardest tasks with an eagerness that felt wrong, like devotion. Some stopped complaining about cold entirely, as if it no longer mattered. I saw one sailor press his bare palm to the ice and smile through the pain, whispering thanks to something unseen. Jory stayed close to me. He was frightened, but still himself. He talked when silence grew too heavy, telling me about his home, his sister, the smell of warm bread in a kitchen. He did it like a spell to keep the world normal. I listened, grateful and terrified by how much comfort I took from such ordinary memories. On the 7th day inland, we reached a vast plain of ice so smooth it looked like a frozen lake the size of a kingdom. The sky above it was low and heavy, clouds like packed wool. The wind here did not gust. It streamed constantly, and it carried that faint, distant hum that made my teeth ache. At the far end of that plain rose shapes, spikes, towers, jagged silhouettes that did not look natural. Black stone thrusting up through ice like a crown's teeth. A fortress. Even from miles away, I could feel its presence. Not like seeing a castle on a hill. This felt like noticing a wound in the world. Captain Dane stared at it, lips tight. "That's where it wants us," he said. Selk's hand tightened on her knife. "And that's where we die," she replied. The undead patrols appeared again, more numerous now, lining the edges of the plain like shepherds on hills. They did not descend. They simply watched as we began our crossing. Halfway across, the horn sounded again, closer than before. The note rolled over us and sank into the ice. Men staggered. Some dropped to their knees. One sailor sobbed openly, hands clutched to his chest as if his heart was trying to climb out. Then I heard it. Not the horn, something else beneath it. Whispers. Many voices, faint, like a crowd praying in a far cathedral. They spoke words I could not understand, but the cadence felt familiar. Ritual, oath, vow. The whispers threaded through our ranks. Men's eyes glazed, their steps slowed. "Keep moving," Captain Dane shouted. "Don't stop." But the ice seemed to pull at our boots now, not physically, but with a sense of inevitability. The fortress ahead grew larger, and with it grew a feeling in my chest that was almost like relief. An end point, a place where the marching would stop. That was the danger, that relief. Jory grabbed my sleeve. His eyes were wide with terror. "Kaelin," he whispered, I keep thinking if I just go there, everything will make sense." I swallowed hard. "That's not sense," I said. "That's surrender." He nodded, shaking. "I know. but it feels like being tired for your whole life and finally seeing a bed. The voice came then, clear as spoken words, riding the wind straight into my thoughts. Yes, it murmured. Rest. I stumbled, breath catching. I pressed my fingers to my temple, trying to push it away. Selk noticed. It's talking to you too, she said, not a question. I forced a nod. It talked to me last night, she said, voice tight. It said my scar would stop hurting. It said my rage could become purpose. And? I asked. Selk's jaw clenched. And for a heartbeat, I wanted to believe it, she whispered. That's how it gets in. We kept moving. Near the far edge of the plain, we found another arrangement of corpses pinned by runeblades. These were fresher. The flesh had not fully shrunk. Their eyes were still glossy under ice. Their faces showed less terror and more emptiness, like men who had stopped resisting. Among them stood one body that was not human. Its armor was ornate, its helm crowned with spikes. A rune blade pinned it through the chest, but its hands were folded neatly over its stomach, as if it had laid itself down willingly. At its feet, carved into the ice in deep grooves, was a symbol that made my throat tighten. A circle. Lines radiating from it like a broken sun. A crown. Captain Dane stared at it. This is a road, he whispered. They're marking it. And we're walking it, Harrow said, voice hollow. We reached the base of the fortress at dusk. It was not one wall. It was layers of ice and stone fused together, shaped into battlements and spires that looked grown rather than built. Frost clung to every surface, but the structure did not look buried. It looked comfortable in the cold, like a beast in its native skin. A wide stairway led up into a gate shaped like a yawning mouth. Inside was darkness. We stopped. No one spoke for a long time. Even the wind seemed quieter here, as if listening too. Then the undead appeared, not around us, not behind us. Ahead. They lined the stairs and the edges of the gate. Dozens, hundreds, silent as shadows. They did not block the way. They framed it, like an honor guard. One of them stepped forward. Tall, armored, cloak stiff with frost. It raised its arm and pointed inward. The invitation. Captain Dane's hands trembled. He looked back at the men. They looked at him with fear, with hope, with exhaustion. Some looked at the fortress with the glazed hunger of sleepwalkers. Dane's voice was rough. We don't go in, he said. We turn south. We find another route to the coast. A murmur ran through the men. Not agreement, not relief. Something else. Disappointment. The voice in the air returned, gentle as a lover. Why run? It whispered. Why flee what you were chosen to witness? Captain Dane shouted, Ignore it! But his shout sounded small against the fortress. Then the undead did something that broke my understanding. They moved aside. The honor guard parted, opening a clear path away from the fortress, leading along the base of the wall and curving back toward the plain. A corridor of silence, offered like mercy. Selk's eyes narrowed. They're letting us go? No, I whispered, feeling cold spread through my chest. They're letting us choose. Captain Dane swallowed. He took one step toward the offered path away from the gate. The undead did not react. He took another, Still nothing. Behind us, on distant ridges, more undead gathered, but they did not close in. They simply watched. We began to move away from the fortress, slow at first, then faster as relief surged. Men murmured thanks, some to the light, some to nothing. Jory squeezed my arm, trembling. "We're getting out," he whispered. The horn sounded again, not from the north, from within the fortress. It was louder than ever, deep and mournful, vibrating the ice under our boots. The sound made men stagger. Some dropped to their knees, some covered their ears and screamed. The undead honor guards still lining the gate, all sank to one knee again, bowing their heads toward the darkness inside. And in that instant I understood. The horn was not a signal to the undead outside. It was an announcement. Something inside had heard us leave. Something inside was aware of our refusal. The voice in the wind did not become angry. It became softer, almost sympathetic. "You are afraid," it murmured. "That is natural. Even a prince was afraid." Images slammed into my mind. A young man with golden hair, his hands shaking on a sword hilt, his eyes haunted. A whisper in his ear, "Take it." A crown waiting. A kingdom in peril. Then the image shifted. The same man, older by grief, wearing a crown of ice, eyes burning blue. The fortress, the throne, the face carved away. I stumbled, nearly falling. Jory caught me. "You saw something," he whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. Ahead, the path away from the fortress remained open. The undead did not pursue. They did not need to. The sound of the horn still thrummed in the air, and with it came a new sensation, like invisible hands tightening around our hearts. Men began to slow again, to glance back toward the gate, to drift subtly, like iron filings toward a magnet. Captain Dane barked orders, but his voice was swallowed. Harrow cursed and shoved a sailor forward, but the sailor stumbled, eyes blank, whispering Arthas under his breath, as if it were a prayer he had always known, unbound and guarded, lifted his head sharply. His eyes widened as if hearing a beloved song. "He's here," he whispered. "Who?" I demanded, though my skin already knew. Olin's lips trembled. "Not him," he said, voice broken. "Not yet. But the waiting is ending." A sudden blizzard rolled in from the plain, thick as a wall. Snow swallowed the horizon. The fortress vanished behind white. The wind howled, and within its howl the voice returned, calm and inviting. "Come closer," it murmured. "You do not have to be lost anymore. You do not have to choose wrong again." Men began to cry, not from cold, from relief, from longing. I watched one hardened sailor, a man who had boasted about killing pirates with his bare hands, drop his musket and sob like a child, whispering, "Yes, yes, please." Selk slapped him hard. "Wake up!" she shouted. He blinked, stunned, then looked past her, eyes softening again. "It promised," he whispered, smiling faintly. "It promised I could. Stop being afraid." Selk's face twisted with fury and grief. She grabbed him by the collar and shook him. "You don't get to stop," she snarled. "Not here." Captain Dane fought to keep us moving. He ordered ropes tied between men so the blizzard could not separate us. He ordered Harrow to stop shouting and start hauling. For a while, sheer will kept us from drifting back toward the fortress. Then the scourge made its point. A group of undead emerged from the blizzard behind us, not charging, walking. They closed the distance in perfect formation, their boots crunching in unison. They did not raise their weapons. They simply approached until they were close enough that we could see their frozen faces clearly. Then they stopped. They stood behind us, a silent wall. Ahead, the path was open, to the south, toward escape. The undead did not attack. They did not block. They simply existed, making it impossible to forget that they could kill us if they wished. A message. We could go, for now, but we would go with their eyes on our backs, with their patience surrounding us like ice. Captain Dane looked back at them, then forward into the blizzard. His shoulders sagged for a moment. Then he straightened. "They're letting us leave," he said hoarsely. "But they're not done. They're preserving us." Harrow swallowed. "Why?" I heard myself answer before I meant to. "Offerings," I whispered. Selk's eyes flicked to me. "Offerings for who?" My mouth was dry. "For a champion," I said, and the word tasted like iron. "For the one they're waiting for." We pushed on. 2 days blurred into one long white struggle. The blizzard did not lift. The wind did not ease. Men's faces grew waxy. Lips cracked and bled. Fingers turned black at the tips. We burned coal in small braziers while we marched, carrying little pockets of heat like stolen treasure. We ate frozen meat that tasted like salt and defeat. All the while we were not attacked. That was the worst of it. The scourge could have ended us 100 times. Instead, it guided us around crevasses that could swallow whole groups. It held back storms just enough for us to survive, then pushed again. It kept us alive like a farmer keeps livestock alive until market day. On the 10th day inland, we saw the coast again. Not our inlet. A different stretch of shoreline, jagged and open, with black water grinding against ice. The sight nearly made men weep with relief. A way out, a sea. But our ship was not there. Only empty water and broken flows. Captain Dane's face tightened. "We build," he said, "rafts, anything. We get off this land." We gathered driftwood where we could find it, scarce and brittle. We tore apart sledges. We used rope and nails and desperate ingenuity. We built 3 crude rafts, barely stable, and a 4th smaller one for supplies. The sea heaved sluggishly, thick with ice fragments, but it was water. It moved. It promised motion. As we worked, undead watched from the ridges above the shore, silhouettes against gray sky. They did not interfere. They did not approach. They simply observed, as if curious to see how the attempt would end. When the rafts were ready, we loaded them in a frantic rush. Men argued, men begged, men shoved. Captain Dane kept order with a voice that was more threat than command now. Selk stood at his side, knife visible, eyes daring anyone to test her. Olin was brought last, still bound, eyes hollow. He looked at the sea with something like awe. "It's moving," he whispered. "It's still allowed to move." "Get on!" Harrow snapped, pushing him. Olin stumbled, then looked back north toward the unseen fortress. His lips moved soundlessly. I caught a fragment. Arthas. I grabbed his arm. "Olin," I said sharply, "stay with me." He blinked, startled, as if waking. "Kaelin," he whispered, "if I go back in my mind, If it takes me, don't let me hurt anyone." My throat tightened. "I won't," I lied, because I did not know if I could keep that promise. We shoved off at dawn. The rafts creaked and dipped. Men paddled with makeshift oars, arms shaking. The water was black and thick, dragging at the rafts as if reluctant to let anything leave. Ice bumped against the logs with dull knocks, like a slow drum. We moved. Inch by inch, we moved away from the shore. A ragged cheer rose. It died quickly, choked by exhaustion and the fear of jinxing fragile hope. The undead remained on the ridges, still as carved stone. Then the horn sounded again, distant now from the north. The undead did not march. They did not pursue. They knelt. All along the ridges, silhouettes sank to one knee, heads bowed toward the horizon. Even the ones far away, barely visible, moved in perfect unison. A vast army kneeling in silence, not for us, not for victory, but for anticipation. Captain Dane stared back at them, face pale. "They're not angry," he whispered. "They're reverent." Selk's voice was a harsh whisper. "They can smell their king." The water suddenly began to churn, not like a storm, like something shifting beneath, massive and slow. The rafts rocked. Men shouted. Jory clutched my arm, knuckles white. From the water rose ice, not floes drifting, not plates pushed by current. New ice surged upward, knitting together, forming a jagged ridge across our path. It grew fast, cracking and popping, a wall being built by unseen hands. Men screamed, paddles splashed. The rafts bumped the newborn ice and scraped along it, unable to pass. Captain Dane shouted orders. "Back! Find an opening!" We tried. We pushed and scraped and cursed. The ice extended. It curved. It formed a crescent that mirrored the undead crescent from our first dawn inland. The sea was hurting us too. Jory's voice shook. "It won't let us go." Captain Dane's face twisted with rage. He pulled a pistol, fired into the ice as if bullets could intimidate water. The shot echoed, meaningless. Then, through the hiss of freezing water and the groan of shifting flows, I heard the voice again. Not angry, not triumphant, inviting. "You can leave the land," it murmured, "but you cannot leave the call." Men around me flinched as if struck. Some stared at the horizon, eyes wide, as if hearing it too. Harrow shook his head violently, muttering curses. Selk bared her teeth like an animal. Captain Dane drew his sword. He raised it toward the forming ice wall as if challenging a god. "We are not yours," he shouted into the wind. For a heartbeat, everything stilled. Then the ice wall cracked open. A gap formed, not wide, just enough for a raft to slip through if it was guided carefully. The opening pointed not south, not toward any familiar route, but east, along the coast, toward a dark headland where cliffs rose like teeth. A direction offered, a choice again. Captain Dane's shoulders sagged. His sword lowered slightly. He looked at Arthas, Selk, then at me, then at the men clutching paddles with numb hands. "They want us to go there," he said, voice thick. Selk's eyes were hard. "If we don't, the wall closes." As if to prove her right, the ice began to creep again, slowly narrowing the gap, not fully closing, but suggesting it could. Captain Dane's jaw clenched. "Through," he ordered. "Now." We guided the rafts through the gap one by one, scraping ice, hands bleeding, hearts pounding. Once through, the new ice behind us sealed, smooth and seamless, as if it had never opened at all. The sea carried us along the coast toward the dark headland. The cliffs ahead were carved by wind into shapes that looked like faces, mouths open, eyes hollow. Snow clung to ledges like hair. The water narrowed into a channel between ice and rock, forcing us forward like a funnel. At the end of that channel was a cave. Not a small sea cave, a vast opening at the base of the cliff, wide enough for a ship. Darkness inside, deep and complete. The voice in the wind softened. "Shelter," it murmured. "Safety. Rest." Captain Dane stared at the cave. His face was drawn, eyes sunken. "If we go in there," he said slowly, "we may never come out." "And if we don't," Selk replied, "we freeze on the water, or the ice rises again." Men looked at the cave with dread and longing. A place out of the wind, a place where the cold might ease, a place where the march might end. Jory whispered, "It's like a mouth." I tasted bile. "And we are being fed to it," I said. But we went in anyway, because the alternative was dying slowly on open water, and desperation makes obedience look like choice. Inside, the cave swallowed sound. Even the water seemed quieter, thick and reluctant. Our lanterns cast small circles of light that could not touch the ceiling or the far walls. The air was colder than outside, but steadier, like the cold of a cellar rather than a storm. The smell was wrong. Not rot, not salt, something like old metal and incense, like Marin burning. The cave widened into a chamber, and there, embedded in the ice walls, were more blades, hundreds of them, rune blades driven into the frozen stone like stakes. Their runes glowed faintly, casting a sick blue shimmer across the chamber. The blades formed patterns, lines converging toward a central point where the ice rose into a dais. On that dais sat something that made my lungs seize. A throne, not as large as the fortress's imagined throne, but unmistakable. Ice shaped into jagged arms and a high back like frozen waves. It gleamed with inner light, as if the ice remembered a sun that never shone here. No one spoke. Even Harrow was silent. The voice was everywhere now, not in wind, but in the very cold. "You found it," it murmured. "You came as you were meant to." Captain Dane stepped forward, trembling. He looked like a man approaching an altar. Selk grabbed his sleeve. "Don't!" she hissed. Dane's eyes were unfocused. "If I sit," he whispered, voice thick, "does it end?" Selk's face tightened. "That's not for you," she said. Dane blinked, as if waking. He pulled back, breathing hard. "No," he said louder, as if reminding himself. "No one sits." A sound came from deeper in the cave. A low scrape. Footsteps. Undead emerged from the darkness, not rushing, not snarling, but walking in pairs, lines, ranks. They filled the chamber's edges, silent. Their eyes burned blue, reflecting off the rune blades like stars in dead water. They did not attack. They watched. One undead figure stepped forward, taller, armored in ornate plate, a crown-like helm fused to its skull. It stopped at the foot of the dais and knelt, head bowed toward the empty throne. Then, one by one, the others did the same. A chamber of kneeling dead. Waiting. My hands began to shake so badly my lantern swung, light wobbling. Jory whispered, voice barely there. "They're worshipping." "No," Selk whispered, back, voice fierce and frightened. "They're rehearsing." Olin, still bound, began to laugh softly. Tears ran down his cheeks and froze. "Not worship," he murmured. "Welcome." Captain Dane's voice was a ragged growl. "We leave. Now." The undead did not rise. They did not block our path back to the rafts. They remained kneeling, as if unconcerned by our refusal, as if refusal did not matter, because waiting was eternal. We turned to go, and that was when the voice spoke directly to me again, using my name like a hook. "Kaelin," it murmured, "you are so close to being free of doubt." I stumbled, heart hammering. The lantern nearly fell. In my mind, images flooded. A crown of ice, a sword in a young prince's hands, a friend on his knees, pleading, a kingdom behind him, burning. The prince's voice raw with conviction. "I will save them no matter what it costs." The cost was faces carved away. The cost was armies of dead marching in perfect formation. The cost was this, cold discipline training the land for war. The voice softened further. "He will come," it promised. "He will sit. He will finish. Do you want to be lost when purpose arrives?" I clenched my teeth. "No," I whispered, but I meant no to the voice, not to the question, and it knew. The undead began to rise, not quickly, but as one, like a tide lifting. They formed two lines leading from the chamber toward a deeper tunnel behind the throne. An honor corridor, an invitation to go farther in. Captain Dane grabbed my arm. "Thorn," he snapped, eyes fierce. "Move!" I moved, stumbling toward the rafts, toward any direction that was not deeper. Jory stayed tight at my side. Selk hauled Olin along, jaw clenched. Harrow shoved men forward with frantic energy, fear finally burning through his arrogance. We reached the rafts and shoved off from the cave chamber, paddling blindly in darkness until the cave mouth showed as a gray slit ahead. Behind us, the undead did not follow into the water. They stood at the edge of the chamber, watching, still and patient. As we emerged into the open channel, daylight hit our eyes like pain. The wind outside was harsh, but it felt clean compared to the cave's still cold. We paddled hard, muscles screaming, trying to outrun a land that could shape ice at will. The coast slid by, jagged and bleak. The sky remained gray, as if the sun had forgotten how to rise here. We found, after hours of desperate searching, a break in the ice where the sea was open enough to risk heading south. We took it, because it was there, and because hope is a foolish animal that keeps climbing out of graves. For a day, it seemed we might escape. The coast receded. The cliffs became distant teeth. The water moved. The ice floes thinned. Men began to whisper in disbelief. Some laughed quietly, the sound brittle but real. Then the wind shifted. The horn sounded again, faint but clear, rolling over the water from behind us. Men froze. Oars paused mid-stroke. Even when the sea seemed to hold its breath. On the far horizon, where Northrend was now a smear of white and black, I saw something rise. Not a ship, not a mountain. A storm. A wall of snow and dark cloud moving fast, swallowing the horizon. It advanced with purpose like an army. Captain Dane's face tightened. "Row!" he shouted. "Row!" We rowed until our shoulders tore. The rafts surged forward, but the storm gained. the wind at its front edge pushing like a hand on our backs, not helping, but driving. Snow began to fall, thick and stinging. The water darkened. Ice formed again around the logs, creeping, gripping. The voice returned, not angry, not harsh. "You can go," it murmured, "but you will carry it with you." Men began to scream again, not all, only some. The same ones who had been most changed. They clutched their heads, shouting Arthas into the storm, as if the name were a lifeline. One sailor threw himself into the water, laughing and sobbing, arms spread wide. The cold swallowed him in seconds. He vanished without a ripple, and the ice sealed over where he had gone, smooth as glass. Jory's face was white with terror. "Kaelin!" he cried. "What is it doing?" "It's thinning us," Selk snarled over the wind, "making sure only the right ones remain." "The right ones for what?" Jory sobbed. Selk looked at Olin, who was staring north with a smile of pure grief. "For the offering," she said. A raft to our left cracked. A sudden surge of ice rose beneath it, lifting it, splitting logs, sending men tumbling. They screamed, flailing, but the water was already freezing around them, climbing their legs like hands. Two men clung to the broken raft piece, eyes wild. Undead rose from the water beside them, not swimming, not climbing, rising. They emerged like statues pulled up by unseen ropes, water streaming off their armor and freezing instantly. They grabbed the two men gently, almost carefully, and lifted them onto a newly formed ice shelf. The men screamed, thrashing. The undead did not kill them. They held them still, restraining with calm efficiency, then carried them away across the ice that had formed behind us, walking back toward the storm, toward Northrend, as if delivering parcels. I watched, numb, as the two men were taken. Their screams faded into wind. The undead did not even look at us. Jory shook violently. "They could have killed them," he whispered. "Yes," I said, voice hollow. "But they didn't. Because this was not slaughter. It was collection." Captain Dane's raft surged ahead, but the storm pressed closer. Ice formed around the logs again, slowing us. The sea turned into slush. Our paddles felt like stirring thick soup. Harrow screamed curses at the sky. Then he began to laugh. It was sudden. He threw his head back and laughed into the snow, a harsh, cracked sound. His eyes shone with tears. "Of course," he gasped between laughs. "Of course it waits. Of course it needs a king." Selk slapped him, hard. Harrow blinked, stunned. Then his face twisted. "It told me," he whispered. "It told me if I stopped fighting it, I'd stop being afraid." Selk grabbed his collar. "And you believed it?" Harrow's eyes darted toward the storm behind us. "For a heartbeat," he whispered. "And that heartbeat was the sweetest thing I've ever felt." He shoved Selk away and stumbled to the edge of the raft as if to jump. I lunged and grabbed him. My fingers locked into his coat. "Don't!" I snarled. Harrow looked at me, eyes wide and wet. "You're holding on to doubt like it's virtue," he whispered. "What if it's just pain you refuse to end?" I shook him. "It's lying," I said, voice shaking. "It's turning you into a tool." Harrow's lips trembled. For a moment, he looked like a frightened boy. Then his eyes went blank. His mouth opened. "Arthas," he whispered, and the name was not his anymore. He tore free with sudden, strength I did not expect. He hurled himself into the slush. The cold swallowed him. His scream was brief. The ice closed. I stared, panting, fingers numb and aching, and realized something that made my stomach drop. The scourge did not have to hurt us all the way back. It only had to keep enough of us alive and break the rest into either corpses or worshippers. Captain Dane's raft veered, trying to find a gap in the forming ice. A crack opened ahead, a narrow channel of dark water like a wound. He ordered us through. We pushed, we scraped, we surged forward, the rafts grinding against ice. Men cried out as splinters tore hands. I kept rowing, arms screaming, the storm's breath on my neck. We slipped through the channel. For a moment the wind eased, the snow thinned, the water opened wider. The horizon to the south looked almost clear. Hope flared again, dangerous and bright. Then the horn sounded, very far now, very low, like a goodbye. And behind us, through thinning snow, I saw Northrend's coast. On the ridges, the undead gathered. Thousands of them, maybe more. A line that stretched along the shore like a scar. They did not march. They did not raise weapons. They knelt. All of them, in silence, facing the northern horizon, as if sensing their future king beyond sight. The storm behind us began to dissipate, not chased away, but withdrawn, like a hand releasing a leash. The sea, obedient again, loosened its grip. The ice stopped forming as aggressively. The water accepted our rafts, letting them drift south. Captain Dane stared back at the kneeling host until his eyes looked empty. "It's letting us go," he whispered. Selk's voice was ragged. "It's done with us?" I shook my head slowly, the truth settling like lead. "No," I whispered. "It's sending us." Jory looked at me, confused and terrified. "Sending us where?" "To tell the world," I said. My throat burned. "To spread the name. To make sure people know a throne waits." Olin laughed softly, tears freezing on his cheeks. "Yes," he whispered. "Witnesses." We drifted south for days. The sea remained brutal, but it was the brutality of nature, honest and indifferent. It did not whisper. It did not invite. It only tried to drown us, and that felt almost comforting compared to being guided. Men died anyway. Frostbite turned to infection. Hunger hollowed cheeks. One raft was lost in a storm, smashed against ice. We did not have the strength to search. We could only keep moving. Through it all, the voice never fully left. Sometimes it was a faint warmth in my thoughts when I was about to sleep, offering rest if I would just stop resisting. Sometimes it was a whisper of a name on the wind, and men would flinch and look north. Olin grew quieter. He stopped screaming. That was worse. He began to murmur to himself in calm, steady tones, as if reciting scripture. When I leaned close once, I heard him whisper, "He will do what must be done. He will save them. He will end the doubt." Jory stopped talking about home. He became pale and silent, staring at the horizon with haunted eyes. Once in the night, I heard him whisper, "Golden hair," like a child describing a dream. Captain Dane kept a journal through it all. I saw him writing by lantern light, hands trembling, jaw clenched. He wrote like a man trying to pin reality to paper before it slipped away. Selk watched him with quiet respect. and I realized she was clinging to his writing the way I clung to prayer. Proof. Record. Something that could outlast madness. When we finally reached waters we recognized, when the air softened enough that our breaths did not hurt, when we saw a distant ship and screamed ourselves hoarse, waving rags as flags, I expected relief to break me. It did not. Because even as warm hands pulled us aboard, even as blankets covered our shoulders, even as broth touched our tongues, I felt Northrend behind us like a gaze, waiting. Captain Dane survived the rescue, but he was not the same man who had left harbor with destiny in his mouth. He slept little. When he did, he woke gasping, eyes wild, whispering, "Not yet," as if bargaining with a clock. Selk sat beside him often, silent. Jory clung to me like a shadow, afraid to be alone with his thoughts. Olin sat apart, bound still, calm and smiling faintly at nothing, murmuring that name like a lullaby. Arthas. On the 5th night aboard the rescue ship, Captain Dane asked me to bring him ink. His hands were shaking. His eyes were sunken. "I need to finish," he whispered. "Finish what?" I asked, though I knew. "The record," he said. "Before it fades. Before we convince ourselves it was just cold and fear." I sat with him while he wrote, lantern light trembling. He wrote slowly, each word dragged out like a stitch through tough flesh. Selk stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, steadying him. When he was done, he handed me the journal. "Read the last line," he whispered. My throat tightened as I looked down at the ink, smeared in places by shaking fingers. The final entry was short. No flourish, no prayer, just truth, nailed to paper. I read it aloud, my voice barely more than breath. Northrend does not conquer. It waits for him.